The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was huge beyond belief. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. 47 different alien species had gathered for this emergency meeting, and the air buzzed with worry and fear. Ambassador Kim Taiho sat quietly in the small section marked for humans. He wore his simple black suit and tried not to look nervous even though his heart was beating fast. Around him towered creatures that looked like living nightmares. The Zentari looked like giant octopuses with metal arms. The Malari were like huge slugs that leaked smelly liquid when they got scared. The vegans were made of living crystal that sang when they talked. Kim had been Earth's representative to the Galactic Council for 3 years now. He had seen many strange things in that time, but nothing like this. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the latest reports from the Outer Rim. 3 more star systems had fallen to the Drakari Empire. In just the past month, entire worlds had been destroyed or enslaved. The Drakari were the stuff of nightmares. They stood 12 feet tall with thick armor covering their bodies from head to toe. They had 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through steel. Their faces were like a cross between a shark and a dragon with rows of teeth that could bite through metal. They lived only to fight and conquer, and they were very good at both. Speaker Vorthak stood at the center of the room. His 4 arms waved in the air as he spoke. His voice was deep and booming, and it made the floor shake when he got excited. He was the leader of the council and had been for over 200 years. The situation is terrible, he said, his voice filled with despair. The Drakari Empire has taken control of 60% of the Outer Rim worlds. They are moving toward the inner systems now. They demand that all remaining free worlds surrender and pay tribute. If we refuse, they promise to destroy everything. The hall filled with sounds of fear and worry. The Malari started leaking their stress chemicals so badly that the air cleaning systems had to work overtime. The crystal vegans sang notes so high and sharp that several species had to cover their ears. The octopus-like Zentari wrapped their metal arms around themselves like they were trying to hide. Kim listened to it all and felt a cold anger growing in his chest. He had read the reports. He knew what tribute meant to the Drakari. It meant giving them half of everything your world produced. It meant sending your young people to become soldiers in their army. It meant living in fear and never knowing when they might decide you were not useful anymore. We have tried to fight them before, said another speaker. This was Ambassador Silax from the Rigel system. Her people looked like walking trees with silver bark and glowing leaves. 3 of our battle fleets attacked their forward positions last month. The Drakari destroyed all our ships in less than an hour. They did not even seem to notice we were shooting at them. Kim had seen the battle recordings. The Drakari ships were massive things, the size of cities. They had weapons that could tear apart the fabric of space itself. Their warriors wore armor that could stop any weapon the other species had tried to use against them. They fought with a savage joy that was terrifying to watch. More speakers stood up to share their stories of defeat. The Polaris Federation had lost 15 worlds in 2 weeks. The Omega Alliance had surrendered without even trying to fight. The Helix Confederation had tried to negotiate. And the Drakari had destroyed their capital world just to make a point. Every story was the same. The Drakari were unstoppable. They had been conquering worlds for over 50 years now, and no one had ever successfully fought them off. They were like a plague that spread across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. The worst part was that the Drakari seemed to enjoy the suffering they caused. They did not just conquer worlds, they made examples of them. They would destroy cities for no reason other than to spread fear. They would enslave entire populations and force them to fight their own neighbors. They turned conquest into an art form of cruelty. Kim felt his anger growing stronger as he listened. The other species spoke of the Drakari like they were a natural disaster, something that could not be fought or stopped. They talked about surrender like it was the only reasonable choice. They had given up before the fight even began. Then Speaker Vorthak called for the final reports. The last few worlds that had not yet fallen were asked to share their status. Kim knew this was it. This was the moment when Earth would have to declare what they planned to do. The Centauri Republic spoke first. They had already sent messages of surrender to the Drakari, hoping to negotiate better terms. The Proxima Coalition was evacuating their outer worlds and falling back to their core systems. The Tau Ceti Union was trying to hide their planets by shutting down all communications and hoping the Drakari would not notice them. Finally, Speaker Vorthak looked at Kim. The hall fell quiet. Everyone knew that Earth was one of the last free worlds. The Drakari had already sent their demands to the human government. 7 days to surrender or face complete destruction. Ambassador Kim, the speaker, said, his voice softer now. The Drakari have contacted your world. What is humanity's response? Kim stood up slowly. He could feel every eye in the hall watching him. Some of the aliens looked at him with pity, others with curiosity. Most seemed to think they already knew what he was going to say. After all, what choice did one small world have against a galactic empire? The human delegation had received the Drakari message 3 days ago. Kim could still remember every word of it. The message had been simple and direct: surrender in 7 days, or watch your world burn. Your people will become slaves, or they will become dust. The choice is yours. Kim had watched the recording of the Drakari messenger delivering the ultimatum. The creature had been massive, even by Drakari standards. Its armor was covered in scars from 1,000 battles. Its eyes glowed with the light of someone who had never known defeat. It spoke of destroying Earth like someone else might talk about stepping on an ant. The Galactic Council had expected Earth to ask for help or beg for more time. Maybe they thought the humans would try to negotiate or offer something valuable in exchange for mercy. That was what every other species had done. Kim looked around the hall at all the alien faces staring at him. He saw fear and resignation and the bitter acceptance of defeat. These were species that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had technology that could reshape matter itself. They had knowledge that spanned the cosmos, but they had all learned the same lesson, that survival meant knowing when to surrender. The Drakari sent us their message 3 days ago, Kim said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's translation systems. They gave us 7 days to surrender or face total destruction. The hall was completely silent now. Even the Mallory had stopped leaking their stress chemicals. Kim paused for a moment, then continued, we sent them our reply this morning. What did you tell them? Speaker Vorthak asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Kim looked directly at the speaker, then let his eyes move across the hall, touching on each delegation in turn. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear and completely without fear. We told them no. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The hall erupted in sounds of shock and disbelief. The Mallory started leaking panic chemicals so fast that alarms began going off. The vegans sang notes of pure terror. The Zentari's metal arms clanged together like warning bells. That is suicide, shouted Speaker Vorthak, his voice booming over the chaos. The Drakari will destroy your entire world. They have never failed to conquer a planet. They have targeted. Kim waited for the noise to die down a little, then raised his hand for silence. When he spoke again, his voice was still calm, but now there was something else in it, something that made several of the aliens unconsciously step back. Actually, we told them something else, too. We told them that if they want Earth, they will have to come and take it. Kim paused and smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the temperature in the hall seem to drop by several degrees, and we told them we will be waiting for them. Dr. Park Minho stood in the observation deck above the Galactic Council chambers, watching the chaos unfold below him. He was the lead scientist studying alien minds for the human delegation, and what he was seeing fascinated him more than it worried him. The aliens were not just afraid for humanity, they were afraid of what humanity's response meant for everything they believed about survival and intelligence. Sora stood beside him, looking confused. She was his assistant and had been studying alien behavior for 2 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The panic spreading through the chamber was unlike anything in their records. I do not understand, she said, tucking her black hair behind her ear. We are one small world against a galactic empire. Why are they so scared? Park pulled up his holographic notes, showing the psychological profiles of every major galactic species. He had spent years studying how different alien minds worked, and he had discovered something very interesting. Look at the pattern, he said, pointing to the data. Every species that learned to travel between stars followed the same path. They became smart enough to control their homeworld, then careful enough to survive meeting other species. Being careful became their most important survival skill. The data showed it clearly. The vegans had not fought a real war in 50,000 years. The Mallory would surrender to any enemy stronger than them as an automatic response. Even the Zentari, who looked like living weapons, preferred to talk their way out of fights rather than actually fight. They all learned the same lesson. Park continued. In a galaxy full of species that can destroy planets, the smart thing to do is always surrender and hope for mercy. But humans are different, Sora said, understanding starting to show in her voice. Humans are the exception, Park confirmed. We are the only species that became intelligent by fighting constantly, while every other species learned to avoid conflict. We learned to be excellent at it. We have never met a threat that we did not immediately start planning to fight down. In the main chamber, Ambassador Kim was answering questions from increasingly worried representatives. The Drakari Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds over 50 years. They had never failed to destroy any planet they targeted. The idea that someone might actually fight back was so strange to most species that they could not understand. If the Drakari have weapons that can tear apart the building blocks of matter itself, the Zentari ambassador was saying, his tentacles shaking with fear. They have ships the size of moons. They have warriors bred for nothing but killing. How can you possibly fight them? Kim's answer was simple and said in the same calm voice he might use to discuss the weather, "We will find a way. We always do." The silence that followed was complete. Park watched every species in the chamber stare at Kim like he had just claimed he could breathe in space. The idea of facing impossible odds without surrendering was so completely alien to them that it challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligent behavior. "They think we are crazy," Sora whispered. "They are not wrong," Park replied. "From their point of view, we are, but that is exactly why we might be the only ones who can stop the Drakari. We are too crazy to know when we are supposed to give up." Park had studied the histories of every species in the galaxy. The pattern was always the same. They would develop intelligence, then technology, then encounter other species. After that first contact, they would learn that the universe was full of dangers bigger than anything they could handle. So they became careful. They became diplomatic. They learned to submit rather than fight. Humans were different. They had developed their intelligence through millions of years of warfare. Every advance in human technology had come from trying to fight better. Every social development had come from learning to work together against enemies. Humans had been fighting since before they could speak, and they had never stopped. The Drakari think they understand warfare, Park said to Sora, but they only understand conquest. They fight to take things, to dominate, to control, but humans fight for different reasons. We fight to protect what we love. We fight to defend our home. We fight because some things are worth dying for. This difference was why the aliens were so afraid, Park realized. They understood the Drakari. The Drakari were predictable. They conquered, they enslaved, they moved on to the next target. But humans were something new. Humans might fight just because fighting was the right thing to do. That terrified species that had spent millions of years learning that fighting was always wrong. Look at their body language, Park pointed out. The aliens in the chamber, the Molari, are releasing fear chemicals. The vegans are singing distress songs. The Zentari are coiling their tentacles in defensive positions. They are not just afraid of the Drakari anymore, they are afraid of us. Why? Sora asked. Because we represent something they thought was impossible. A species that became intelligent without becoming careful. A species that developed technology without becoming cautious. A species that learned to survive by fighting rather than by surrendering. Park watched Ambassador Kim fielding more questions from the panicked aliens. The human looked completely calm, surrounded by creatures that could crush him without effort. But Kim was not worried about being crushed. He was thinking about how to fight back. That is what makes humans dangerous. Park continued. We do not surrender. We adapt, we learn, we find weaknesses in things that seem invulnerable. We turn disadvantages into advantages. We make weapons out of things that were never meant to be weapons. The Drakari had conquered the galaxy by being bigger, stronger, and more brutal than everyone else. They had never faced an enemy that fought smart instead of fighting hard. They had never met a species that treated warfare as a science rather than just organized violence. They are about to learn something new, Park said, watching Kim wrap up his discussion with the council. They are about to learn what happens when you threaten something a human loves. The aliens in the chamber were already starting to change their behavior. Park could see it in their posture, in their movements, in the way they looked. At the human delegation before today, humans had been newcomers, barely worth noticing. Now they were something else entirely. They Were the species that said no to the Dracoridhi were the species that chose to fight rather than surrender they were? The species that might actually win or die trying, which from a human perspective was almost the same thing. As the council session ended, Park watched the alien delegations hurry away from the chamber. Most of them would be sending emergency messages to their homeworlds, telling them about the crazy humans who thought they could fight the Drakari. Some would be asking for permission to evacuate their own worlds before the humans got them all killed, but a few Park noticed were moving differently. A few were walking with their heads up instead of down. A few were looking at the human delegation with something that might have been hope instead of fear, maybe. Park thought watching them go, maybe being crazy, was exactly what the galaxy needed after all. Someone had to be first to stand up to the bullies, and if that someone had to be the species too stupid to know when they were beaten, well, that was fine with Park. It was going to be interesting to see what happened when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, especially when the immovable object was armed with human ingenuity and absolutely nothing left to lose. Fleet Admiral Choi Ji-won stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser New Seoul, watching the displays that showed 50 Drakari warships approaching Earth. She was the youngest admiral in human history, and she had earned that rank by thinking differently about warfare than everyone else. 3 days had passed since Ambassador Kim told the galaxy that humanity would fight. The Drakari response had been exactly what everyone expected. A massive fleet led by Warlord Krax himself, the most feared military commander in the galaxy. Admiral, we are getting another message from the Galactic Council, reported Captain Yoon Dae-sung from his station. They are begging us to change our minds. They say they will try to negotiate with the Drakari for US. Juan smiled. But there was no happiness in it. The aliens still did not understand what they were dealing with. They thought this was about pride or stubbornness. They thought humans were just too stupid to see how hopeless the situation was. Any word from the other human fleets? She asked all positioned and ready. Admiral, Operation Trojan Horses go for launch. The approaching Drakari fleet was terrifying to look at. Each ship was the size of a city and covered in weapons that could destroy continents. Their armor was thick enough to stop anything the other galactic species had ever tried to use against them by every measure that mattered. Humanity should have been running away and begging for mercy instead. They had spent 3 days preparing for the biggest military operation in human history. The Drakari are demanding to talk to us, Dae-sung reported. Warlord Krax wants to speak to our leader. Put him on screen. The main display flickered and showed the face of nightmares. Warlord Krax was 12 feet of pure muscle and natural armor with 4 arms that ended in claws, sharp enough to cut through steel. His face was like a cross between a shark and a dragon, with rows of teeth that could bite through metal. His species had evolved from the most dangerous predators on their world, and it showed humans. Krax spoke in a voice like grinding stone that made the bridge speakers shake. You have one last chance to surrender. Give up now, and your deaths will be quick. Continue this foolishness, and I will make your world scream for 1,000 years. Admiral Ji-won stepped forward. Her small human frame looked tiny next to the alien warlord, but her voice was steady and clear. Counteroffer. You have one chance to turn around and leave our system. Do that, and we will not have to destroy your entire fleet. Krax's reaction was immediate and explosive. His roar of rage was so loud that several bridge officers had to cover their ears. You dare threaten me with your pathetic ships? I have conquered 100 worlds. I have eaten the hearts of 1,000 warriors. I have never been defeated in battle. That is very impressive, Ji-won said in a conversational tone, like she was discussing the weather. But you made one mistake. You assumed we would fight you the same way everyone else does. The Drakari warlord leaned forward, his predatory eyes burning with anger. What do you mean? Ji-won smiled, and there was something sharp and dangerous in that expression. You are about to find out. All ships execute Operation Trojan Horse. Show these aliens what humans do when someone threatens our home. Across the solar system, hidden human ships began moving. The Drakari had expected a normal battleship against ship, the kind of honorable combat their warrior culture understood. Instead, they were about to discover that humans had spent centuries learning how to fight wars that could not be won through strength alone. The human fleet was smaller and weaker than the Drakari forces. Everyone knew this, the Drakari knew this, the humans knew this, but humans had learned long ago that wars were not won by having the biggest weapons. Wars were won by using the weapons you had in ways your enemy never expected for 3 days human. Ships had been moving through the solar system, not running away but getting into position. They had been placing devices throughout the system, devices that were not weapons in any traditional sense, but something far more dangerous. The Drakari fleet moved toward Earth confident in their overwhelming superiority. Their ships were armed with quantum disruptors that could tear apart matter itself. Their warriors were bred for combat and had never known defeat. Their strategy was simple and had always worked before: get close to the enemy world and destroy everything that moved. But something was wrong. The human ships were not behaving like prey. They were not running in panic or trying to hide behind their planet they were moving with purpose, drawing the Drakari fleet deeper into the system. By the time Warlord Krax realized what was happening, it was too late, sir. His tactical officer voice cracked with sudden fear. Energy readings throughout the system are going crazy. Something is happening to the Star. Admiral Jiwan watched her plan unfold exactly as she had designed it. For 3 days, human ships had been deploying gravity manipulators throughout the solar system. Not weapons, but tools that could create artificial gravity fields strong enough to affect stellar matter. Activate stellar cascade, she commanded. The effect was immediate and terrible. The manipulators, working together, began creating gravity wells that pulled superheated plasma from the surface of the sun. Massive solar flares erupted in controlled directions, sending waves of starfire racing through the system. Impossible. Krax roared as his fleet shields began failing under the plasma assault. Stars cannot be turned into weapons, but they could if you understood physics better than your enemy. The Drakari had always fought by building bigger guns and stronger armor. They had never learned to use the environment itself as a weapon. Humans had been doing that since they first learned to set forest fires to drive prey into traps. The Drakari ships, designed for normal space combat, were helpless against the solar storm. Their massive size, once an advantage, now made them perfect targets for the plasma waves. One by one, the mighty dreadnoughts began to burn, but the humans were not finished. As the Drakari fleet struggled with the solar assault, human ships emerged from hiding places throughout the system. They had been waiting behind asteroids, in the shadows of gas giant moons, unaware. The Drakari would not think to look. Phase 2. Jiwan ordered all ships weapons free. The human ships were smaller and faster than the Drakari vessels, but they carried something the aliens had never seen before: weapons that learned from their targets. Missiles that changed their attack patterns based on enemy responses, computer viruses that infected enemy systems and turned their own weapons against them. The Drakari had armor that could stop conventional weapons, but they had never faced weapons that adapted to overcome whatever defenses they met. They had shields that could deflect energy beams, but they had never fought weapons that learned to find gaps in those shields. Within 2 hours, the mighty Drakari fleet was nothing but floating debris. Warlord Krax's flagship was the last to fall, its hull eaten away by nanomachines that had been designed to consume the specific metals the Drakari used in their armor. As the battle ended, communication channels across the galaxy lit up with shocked reports. The impossible had happened. The Drakari Empire, which had never lost a battle, had been completely destroyed by a single human world on Earth. Ambassador Kim received an emergency message from the Galactic Council speaker. Vorthok appeared on the screen, his forearms shaking with a mixture of fear and amazement. "What have you done?" he whispered. Kim's response was simple and delivered in the same calm voice he had used 3 days before. "We kept our promise. We told them that if they wanted Earth, they would have to come and take." I paused and looked directly at the camera. They could not. The battle began exactly as Warlord Krax had planned. His massive warships opened fire with quantum disruptors, weapons that could tear apart the basic building blocks of matter itself. The human ships scattered their smaller vessels, no match for Drakari firepower. In a straight fight, cowards, Krax bellowed as the human fleet seemed to run away. They flee like frightened prey animals. "Forward, my warriors, show them the price of defying the Drakari Empire." But something was wrong. The human ships were not running in panic. They were moving with purpose, leading the Drakari fleet deeper into the solar system. By the time Krax realized what was happening, it was already too late. The trap had been 3 days in the making while the galaxy watched and waited for humanity to surrender. Human engineers had been working around the clock. They had not been building bigger guns or stronger shields. They had been preparing something that no one had ever tried before. Admiral G1 watched from the bridge of New Sol as her carefully planned operation began to unfold. The Drakari fleet was exactly where she wanted them. Deep in the solar system, surrounded by the gravity manipulators, her ships had been secretly placing for days. The devices were not weapons in any way the Drakari would understand. They were tools designed to create artificial gravity fields strong enough to affect the sun itself. While other species had spent millions of years learning to build better armor and more powerful guns, humans had learned to turn the universe itself into a weapon-initiated stellar cascade. She commanded. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The manipulators began working together to create gravity wells that pulled superheated plasma from the surface of the sun. Massive solar flares erupted in controlled bursts, sending waves of starfire racing through the system at speeds that made normal weapons look like toys. Impossible cracks roared as his fleet shields began failing under the plasma assault. This cannot be done. Stars are not weapons, but humans had always specialized in doing things that could not be done. They had learned to fly when they had no wings. They had learned to breathe underwater when they had no gills. They had learned to leave their planet when they had no natural ability to survive in space. Now they had learned to weaponize the very stars themselves. The beauty of the plan was in its simplicity. While every other species had focused on building better ships, humans had focused on understanding the environment. They fought in a solar system was not just empty space with planets in it. It was a complex gravitational system with enormous amounts of energy just waiting to be redirected. The Drakari ships had been designed for conventional space combat. Their massive armor was perfect for stopping enemy weapons but useless against the raw power of a star. Their shields could deflect energy beams, but they could not stop the fundamental forces that held the universe together. One by one, the mighty dreadnoughts began to fail. Their quantum disruptors were useless against plasma hot enough to melt planets. Their armor plating started to buckle under gravitational forces that could crush moons. Their proud warriors found themselves helpless against an enemy that fought with the power of suns. But the humans were not finished. Phase 1 of the operation had been to disable the Drakari fleet. Phase 2 was to destroy it completely. As the enemy ships struggled with the solar assault, human vessels emerged from hiding places throughout the system. They had been waiting in the shadows of asteroids, behind the moons of gas giants, in the rings of outer planets. Anywhere the Drakari would not think to look. The human ships were still smaller and weaker than their opponents, but they carried weapons that the Drakari had never encountered before. Adaptive missiles that learned from enemy defenses and changed their attack patterns accordingly. Quantum viruses that infected enemy computer systems and turned their own weapons against them. Nanomachina swarms that could eat through any material given enough time. The Drakari had conquered the galaxy by being bigger, stronger, and more brutal than everyone else. They had never faced an enemy that fought smart instead of fighting hard. They had never met a species that treated warfare as a science rather than just organized violence. Their warriors were bred for hand-to-hand combat, but the humans never got close enough to fight them. Their ships were armored against energy weapons, but the humans used weapons that worked at the molecular level. Their tactics were based on intimidation and overwhelming force, but the humans had already been overwhelmed and refused to be intimidated. Within 3 hours, the battle was over. The Drakari fleet that had conquered half the galaxy was reduced to floating debris. Warlord cracks flagship was the last to fall, its hull consumed by nanomachines that had been specifically designed to eat the metals used in Drakari armor. As the last enemy ship exploded, communication channels across the galaxy erupted with emergency broadcasts. The impossible had happened. The Drakari Empire, which had never lost a battle, had been completely destroyed by a single human world species that had been hiding in terror for decades. Suddenly found themselves free. Worlds that had been preparing to surrender started canceling their capitulation messages. The galaxy that had seemed doomed to eternal slavery was suddenly full of hope, but the aliens were not just amazed, they were terrified. What kind of species could turn stars into weapons? What kind of minds could conceive of using the fundamental Forces of the universe as tools of war. What kind of beings were these humans who had just changed the rules of galactic warfare forever on? Earth Ambassador Kim received an emergency communication from the Galactic Council speaker. Vorthak image appeared on the screen and his forearms were shaking with a mixture of fear and awe. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Kim looked directly at the camera and smiled, the same calm smile he had worn 3 days earlier when he told the galaxy that humanity would fight. "We did exactly what we promised we would do," he said simply. "We told the Drakari that if they wanted Earth, they would have to come and take." I paused, and his smile became something sharp and dangerous. "They could not take it, so we took them instead." The silence that followed was complete. Across the galaxy, billions of beings sat in stunned amazement, trying to process what had just happened. The species that everyone had dismissed as newcomers, the world that everyone had expected to fall without a fight, had just defeated the greatest military force in galactic history, and they had done it not by being stronger or more brutal, but by being smarter, by being more creative, by being more human. The age of Drakari dominance was over. The age of human ingenuity had begun, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire, but the reaction was not what Earth had expected. Instead of celebration, there was fear. Fear of what the humans had accomplished, and fear of what they might do next. Park Min-ho found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain human psychology to a galaxy that was now genuinely terrified of his species. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called just 3 days after the battle, and the atmosphere was thick with suspicion and dread. "You turned your own star into a weapon," accused the Zentari ambassador, his tentacles writhing with barely controlled panic. "You created devices that consumed our ships from the inside out. What kind of species does such things?" Park stood calmly at the speaking podium, his diplomatic training helping him remain composed despite the waves of hostility coming from the assembled aliens. The fear in the chamber was almost physical in its intensity. Every species representative looked at him like he was a dangerous predator that might attack at any moment. "The kind that refuses to surrender to bullies," Park replied simply. "But the implications, speaker." Vorthak's voice cracked with stress. "If humans can weaponize stars, what stops you from destroying entire systems? What stops you from becoming the next galactic empire? What stops you from being worse than the Drakari?" Question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Park could see the terror in every alien face, the growing certainty that humanity had simply replaced one threat with another. They were looking at humans the way small animals looked at wolves, because, Park said quietly, "We are not conquerors, we are protectors." The chamber erupted in sounds of disbelief and mockery. The Mallory delegation was releasing skepticism pheromones so heavily that the air filtration systems were struggling to cope. Several species made sounds that the translation systems rendered as laughter. But there was no humor in it. Every species claims that the vegan representative said, her crystalline form flickering with doubt. The Drakari said they were bringing order to chaos. The Vortok claimed they were spreading enlightenment to primitive worlds. What makes humans different? Park had been expecting this question. He activated a holographic display showing human history, the long bloody record of wars and conflicts that had shaped their species, but instead of hiding from their violent past, he embraced it. "Look at our history," he said simply. "We have had the power to destroy our own world for over a century. We have possessed weapons that could turn our planet into a radioactive wasteland. We have had the knowledge to create biological weapons that could eliminate our entire species." The aliens leaned forward despite their fear. This was not what they had expected, but we did not use them. Park continued. "We chose to step back from the brink. We chose to find another way that proves nothing." The Zentari ambassador snapped. "You simply had not found anyone else to conquer yet." "Wrong," Park replied firmly. "We had each other. For most of our history, humans were divided into hundreds of different nations, cultures, and tribes. We fought each other constantly. We had every reason to use our most terrible weapons against our enemies." He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of creatures that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. "But when we stood on the edge of mutual destruction, we chose to pull back. We chose to be better than our worst impulses. We chose to survive together rather than die apart." The chamber fell silent. This was something none of them had considered. Every other species had unified before. Developing world-ending weapons. Humans had developed those weapons while still fighting each other, and somehow they had survived. The Drukhari threatened our world park continued. They promised to reduce Earth to ash and enslave any survivors in that moment. We could have chosen to become like them. We could have used our new weapons to conquer the galaxy. Before anyone could stop, Yuge gestured to the display showing the wreckage of the Drukhari fleet. Instead, we chose to defend ourselves. And then stop. We could have pursued their retreating ships. We could have followed them back to their homeworld and done to them what they planned to do to us, but we let them go. We chose to be better than our enemies, some of the aliens in the chamber. We're starting to look thoughtful instead of just terrified. The Mallory had stopped releasing panic pheromones. The vegans were humming notes of consideration rather than fear. Your species has done something unprecedented, Park continued. We have proven that it is possible to possess overwhelming power and choose not to abuse it. We have shown that strength and mercy can exist in the same beings. But how do we know you will not change? Asked a representative from the Helix Confederation. Power corrupts all beings. How do we know you will not become the very thing you defeated? Park smiled, and for the first time since the battle, there was genuine warmth in it, because we have already been tested. We have faced our greatest enemy and defeated them, but our greatest enemy was not the Drukhari, it was ourselves. It was the temptation to become monsters in order to fight monsters. He activated another display showing human cities rebuilding, human fleets standing down, human weapons being carefully stored rather than deployed against defenseless worlds. We have stared into the abyss and chosen to step back. We have held ultimate power in our hands and chosen to use it only to protect what we love. We have proven that it is possible to be strong without being cruel. The chamber was quiet now, but it was a different kind of quiet. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else, something that might have been hope. We do not ask you to trust us completely, Park said, his voice carrying to every corner of the Great Hall. We ask you to judge us by our actions, not our capabilities. We ask you to give us the chance to prove that power and righteousness can coexist. He paused and looked directly at Speaker Vorthak. Galaxy has lived in fear for too long, fear of the strong preying on the weak, fear of might making right, fear of survival meaning submission. We offer you a different path, a path where the strong protect the weak, where might serves right, where survival means standing up for what is just. The silence stretched for long moments, then slowly, one by one, the alien representatives began to nod. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of possibility. The galaxy had lived under the rule of tyrants for so long that they had forgotten what it looked like when the powerful chose to be good. No, they were about to learn. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was transformed. The Drukhari Empire had collapsed completely, their conquered worlds liberated by a coalition of species that had found new courage in humanity's example. But the real change was deeper and more profound than anyone had imagined. Ambassador Kim Taiho stood in his new office overlooking the expanded Galactic Council chambers. The old building had been rebuilt to accommodate the dozens of new species that had joined the Alliance. Worlds that had been hiding in the shadows, afraid to stand up to the Drukhari, now had voices in galactic government. The cultural exchange programs are exceeding all expectations, reported His Aide Lee Sora, who had been promoted to deputy ambassador. After her excellent work during the crisis, 17 species have requested human military advisors. The Mallory want to learn about something they call courage. The vegans are asking about what they term righteous anger. Kim nodded, still amazed by the transformation. The galaxy had not just gained a new military power. It had gained a completely new way of thinking about conflict and resistance. Species that had spent millions of years learning to submit were now learning to stand up for themselves. It was not happening everywhere. Some worlds were still too afraid to change their ways, but enough were changing that the entire balance of galactic power was shifting. The age of surrender was ending. The age of resistance was beginning. Any word from the remaining Drukhari? Kim asked. That is the most interesting part, Sora replied. Without their empire to maintain, many of the surviving Drukhari have been reaching out to us. They want to learn about our concepts of honorable warfare and proportional response. Apparently, they respect strength, and they are genuinely confused about why we did not exterminate them when we had the chance. Kim smiled at the irony. The Drakari had been bred for endless conquest. They had never encountered an enemy that fought only when necessary and showed mercy to defeated foes. It was so foreign to their warrior culture that some of them were treating it as a revolutionary military philosophy. The idea that you could be strong without being cruel, that you could win without destroying everything in your path, was completely new to them. They had spent centuries believing that mercy was weakness. Now they were learning that true strength came from knowing when not to use your power. There is something else. Sora continued. Her expression became more serious. The deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual activity from the galactic core. Long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures. There might be another empire out there, something even larger than the Drakarikim. Was not surprised. The galaxy was vast, and it would be naive to think that the Drakari had been the only threat. But somehow the prospect did not fill him with the same dread it would have a year ago. What does the Council recommend? They want to send a diplomatic mission to make first contact. They want to try negotiation before anything else, but Sora hesitated. They want humans to lead the mission. They say, we are the only ones who can speak from a position of strength while still offering peace. Kim looked out at the stars, thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, humanity had been newcomers to the galactic community, barely worth notice now. They were being asked to be the galaxy's protectors and peacemakers. The responsibility was enormous, but Kim felt ready for it. The battle with the Drakari had taught humanity something important about themselves. They had learned that they could be trusted with power. They had proven that they could fight without becoming monsters. Set up the mission, he decided, but make sure we include representatives from every species. This is not about human dominance. This is about showing the galaxy that we are all stronger when we stand together. As Sora left to make the arrangements, Kim reflected on the changes that had swept across the galaxy. The Mallory, who had once cowered at the first sign of danger, were now forming their own defense fleets. The Vegans, who had not fought in 50,000 years, were training their young in the arts of resistance. The Zentari, who had preferred negotiation to conflict, were learning that sometimes fighting was the only way to preserve peace. But the most important change was not in their military capabilities, it was in their hearts. Species that had forgotten how to hope were remembering. Species that had accepted oppression as inevitable were learning to demand freedom. Species that had believed the strong would always prey on the weak were discovering that strength could serve justice. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of threats and challenges. But for the first time in millennia, it was also full of hope. The moment Human Diplomat announced they were going to fight had changed everything, not because humans were the strongest or the smartest, but because they had been the first to prove that some things were worth fighting for, and perhaps more importantly, they had shown that knowing when to stop fighting was just as important as knowing when to start. The new galactic order was not built on fear or submission. It was built on the radical idea that beings could choose to be better than their worst impulses. That power could serve justice, that the strong could protect the weak, that mercy and strength could coexist. It was a human idea, but it was spreading. The galaxy was learning that there was another way to live, a way that did not require choosing between being predator or prey, a way that made room for both strength and compassion. Kim smiled as he watched the ships of a dozen species working together to patrol the spaceways. Ships that had once fled from any sign of conflict now stood ready to defend. The innocent ships that had once submitted to any superior force now fought to protect the weak. The Drakari had ruled through fear and brutality. They had created an empire built on the suffering of others. When they fell, their empire collapsed because it had no foundation other than terror. But what humanity was helping to build was different. It was not an empire, but an alliance. Not a hierarchy, but a community. It was based on the revolutionary idea that beings could choose to be good even when they had the power to be evil, especially when they had the power to be evil. The galaxy was learning that true strength was not the ability to destroy, it was the wisdom to protect, the courage to stand up for what was right, the compassion to show mercy to the defeated, the discipline to use power only when necessary. These were human lessons, but they were becoming galactic truths. And as more species learned these lessons, as more worlds chose cooperation over conquest, the galaxy became a little brighter, a little safer, a little more hopeful. The moment a human diplomat announced they were going to fight had indeed changed everything. But the real victory was not in the battle itself, it was in what came after the choice. To be better, the decision to build rather than destroy, the commitment to protect rather than conquer humanity, had taught the galaxy that fighting was sometimes necessary. But more importantly, they had taught the galaxy that knowing what you were fighting for was what made all the difference, and what they were fighting for was a galaxy where strength served justice, where power protected the innocent, where the strong stood up for the weak, a galaxy where everyone could be free.